perform this duty that's in the Constitution, age old as our democracy itself. And here come a bunch of folks coming in and putting a stop to it.
Absolutely, I'm angry. This isn't the way that this country operates, and it is a disgrace, and it's a disgrace for anyone to tolerate anybody to come in and try to shut down our government. It is absolutely disgraceful.
Congressman.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just about to wrap you up because I want to get to those live pictures, but I didn't mean to interrupt. Final thought.
Final thought is, God bless America. I don't have much else to say.
God bless America, indeed. Sir, thank you. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it. I do want to go to these pictures. This is the west front of the Capitol, and you see the smoke is building, and this being a live situation unfolding. I don't have a ton of information about what exactly has transpired, but you see the flash there. Sometimes a flashbang is used by law enforcement to try to disperse a crowd. It's obviously one of the tactics in their tool belt. And it seems, we saw the FBI SWAT team come in earlier. Brian, I think no question that they are trying to bring this now to an end and say it's enough, time to try to clear the Capitol and get back to business. Pete Williams, our justice correspondent who covers law enforcement. Pete, you have a more trained eye for what we're seeing here, and you certainly have sources inside the law enforcement agencies. What do you see?
Yeah, I can't really be sure where the flashbangs were being set off, whether it was there on the portico, I guess you would call it, or not the portico, but the balcony or whatever that is, outside the Capitol or inside. But there was certainly smoke that blew. It did appear to be a smoke grenade or a flashbang, and not the deployment of a chemical irritant like tear gas. But you know, from this low vantage point, it's hard to tell whose it was. I assume it's law enforcement's. The reason I'm somewhat unsure is that we've been told that several, possibly more than 2 improvised explosive devices have been found on the Capitol grounds. I would think if it was something like that, people would be scattering, and they're not. So that leads me to believe that it probably is law enforcement. And if the intent of it is to get people to move away, it's not having an immediate effect. But I think the other thing that's interesting in this picture is the number of law enforcement people now. We're finally starting to see a definite show of force, a large deployment. All those yellow vests are, I assume, law enforcement, or at least people, official people that are trying to get that crowd moved out of there. So we're starting to see a much bigger deployment. We know that other law enforcement people are coming. They're coming from nearby states. We've just been told that the New Jersey State Police are now sending about 50 people. The FBI's there, the Secret Service there, Homeland Security. Just about every 3-letter law enforcement organization in the D.C. area is there. And, you know, I think one of the questions is going to be why has it taken so long to get them there and to kind of coordinate how this is going to work? It does seem, Savannah, from all the pictures we've seen today, now people seems like they're definitely being pushed back. From all the pictures we've seen today, it does seem like the word had gone out early on to the people who were in the Capitol at the time, the law enforcement folks, the Capitol Police, Metro Police, to the extent that they were there, not to confront, not to have any violent confrontations, but to avoid that as much as possible. That
it sure seemed that way. I mean, Pete, when you saw people just streaming through Statuary Hall as though it were, you know, a high school tour, and no one stopping them, it definitely seemed that was a tactical decision. That's the picture earlier.
Well, and you see that the Capitol policemen just sort of standing at the side, I guess 2 of them waiting for instructions or something, but they may have well made the calculation that those 2 were not going to stop those people, and that there wasn't much they could do, and that but by letting them go through and letting them get into the building, of course, we now know what happened. And so there are going to be lots of questions about this. Some law enforcement people are already pointing to a letter that the mayor sent yesterday to the acting attorney general, to the acting secretary of defense, and the secretary of the army, saying we have all we need for tomorrow. This was yesterday. We have worked with the Park Police, with the Capitol Police, with the Secret Service, and don't send any other federal law enforcement personnel in without checking with us first, because we don't want a situation where there are people deployed and we don't know who they are or who's in charge. So some of the federal officials are already saying, you know, they kept us at arm's length, and that's why it's taking so long to get these people out. Now, you know, we're going to have to wait and see how this all comes together, how that actually played out.
This being Washington, Pete, we will be sure there will be investigations, commissions, and tons of finger pointing and blame shifting, so we can look forward to that in the coming days. But at the moment, we're still in this crisis. These are live pictures from the United States Capitol. If you're just catching up, it has been truly an unprecedented afternoon in which protesters turned into rioters, crossed the barricades, went past police, reached the United States Congress in session, performing its duty of certifying the electoral vote for the next president of the United States. We're able to infiltrate the Capitol, the Senate floor, the House floor, ceremonial offices, sit in office chairs literally with their feet up. And now at this hour, about 10 minutes after 5 o'clock on the East Coast, we are starting to see a little more of an aggressive move from law enforcement to push back these protesters. We saw the FBI SWAT team go in. A few moments ago, we saw smoke, some flashes of light. We have reporters on the ground. We don't want to surmise what those might have been and at whose hands, but perhaps some tactics to try to get this crowd out. We heard from the president-elect, Joe Biden, in a live address to the nation, calling for the restoration of peace, calling for President Trump to tell his supporters to leave the Capitol. And President Trump issued a video on Twitter saying that it was time for them to go home. He also, though, said the election had been stolen from them and was fraudulent, but he said it was time to go home. And that is the state of things as we speak. Let me go to Casey Hunt on Capitol Hill. Casey, there's still important matters for Congress to conduct. The last we checked in with you, these members of Congress were still being told to shelter in place. Vice President Pence, at our last knowledge, was still on the United States Capitol grounds because it wasn't safe for him to go back to the White House. That information's a couple hours old now. But is there a plan? And Pete Williams had reported from a source inside one of those Senate hold rooms, one of that Senate shelter-in-place rooms, that there were senators discussing whether they could just conduct their business from that undisclosed location and just carry on the business of the country anyway with a somewhat defiant attitude. What are you hearing now?
Yeah, I've heard similar, Savannah. I've talked to both House and Senate members, or texted with them, I should say, as they've been trying to figure out what to do. And the first step was to wait for this law enforcement presence to show up, which they clearly have, and the process of that is underway. There is a long list of agencies. Pete walked through some of them that are here that we have seen in the hallways. I mean, it is extraordinarily surreal to see FBI SWAT teams running through hallways that are supposed to be secured, that are supposed to be our corridors of power, literally, where they have been overrun by these rioters and are no longer able to actually exercise that power the way our Constitution says that they should be able to. So you're looking at some of it here. I mean, I never thought I would see anything like this coming from what your last guest was just talking about, a threat from the inside, the former Homeland Security Secretary. This wasn't an outside attack. So yes, there are still questions. We know that their members are still huddling in these undisclosed locations and trying to figure out how to proceed. Senators actually have the Electoral College votes with them in this undisclosed location. I'm told that a Senate staffer actually was the one who thought to grab them. And remember, this is a pretty old, arcane process, the counting of the Electoral College votes. And think back to when they would have put this law in place. I mean, Pete Williams called it the oldest, one of the oldest functions of our government. They would have been bringing these certificates from across the country on horseback. They would have been concerned about whether the people charged with getting them to the right place were able to survive their journeys. I know it may sound dramatic, but that was the circumstances that they were dealing with. And it's part of why the law is written to send several copies of these certificates out there. But what it means is that those physical items are imbued with very important characteristics, right? They come here, they open, this is what Congress is supposed to do. They open the envelopes, they read the numbers, they figure out what they say, and they put down the official tally. And yes, we don't necessarily need to do it that way now in the age of the internet, but that's how we do it here in the country. So the physical manifestation of those is very important, and somebody just grabbed them on the way secure location, Savannah.
Well, you know, I think that's actually quite poignant, Casey. I mean, it's not just a matter of ceremony, or in some ways it is, but at this really dark moment in our country, it calls into mind our history, and that this democracy, this only, you know, few hundred years old, is fragile, as we've heard many of our leaders say today. And that notion of somebody just grabbing those electoral votes, which of course represent the will of the people and the voters who came and exercised their precious right to vote, you know, it actually, I think it really puts things into sharp relief at this extraordinary moment in our country. And Casey, honestly, there are probably folks tuning in here who are just living their lives. We're in the midst of a pandemic. We have an actual crisis going on, a health crisis in our country. And now there's this crisis that did not have to happen. To catch people up who may have not been following this as closely as you do every day, this electoral college vote that was to take place today, there was no suspense about the outcome. The votes are in, they've been certified, the legal challenges have been mounted, they've been rejected, recounts have been requested, the recounts have happened, the audits have happened. All of the legal remedies that could be exercised had been exercised, and this was supposed to be just the final moment where it's almost like a rubber stamp, where the electoral votes are read and certified, and then in 2 weeks we have an inauguration. Bring us up to date on what a core of Republicans were trying to do today and what the ramifications of that are.
Savannah, as the morning unfolded, you know, I came into the Capitol as usual, and there were some protesters around, but frankly, protesting is a pretty common thing here in Washington. I've seen a lot of it. It's not usually an issue. It didn't seem abnormal or out of the ordinary, but the process that was about to be undertaken here today was, from the start of the day, historic. We were expecting to see and did see an objection to the counting of the Electoral College votes. And normally this only takes about a half an hour. This is, I believe, the fourth one of these that I've been up here for. It's the first one I even really remember, although I remember seeing the mahogany boxes go by in past election cycles. But of course, President Trump had urged his supporters to question the integrity of the election, to try and fight back. Stop the steal is the phrase that they have been using. And while everything got off to what seemed like a normal start here in the building, the objection was made. The way the process works, all members of Congress were together in a joint session. Once the objection was made, they were to separate to their respective chambers. This is all laid out very carefully in the law. Each chamber was to debate for 2 hours this objection and then take a vote on whether or not these electoral college votes were properly cast and should be counted. And we know that there were Republicans, many of them prepared to vote that no, those electoral votes should not be counted. However, Mitch McConnell actually opened the debate on the Senate floor by saying that it was time to put this all behind us, that if, in fact, they continued with the objection to the counting of the votes, to certifying President-elect Joe Biden as the president, that our country would end up in a death spiral. That was the phrase that he used. Our democracy would end up in a death spiral. And just moments later, we saw protesters, rioters rushing the Capitol, eventually breaching both the House and Senate floors, now leaving us with lawmakers in hiding, unable to conduct the business of the country, and an uncertain outcome in terms of how law enforcement is going to finally put an end to all of this. Savannah.
All right, Casey, thank you. Let's take a pause right here. I'm going to turn coverage over to Chuck Todd, our political director, host of Meet the Press, to carry it on. We'll check back in with you, Chuck, in just a couple of moments. I'll send it to you.
All righty. Thank you, Savannah. Let's go now down to Vaughn Hilliard. He's on the west side of the Capitol. Vaughn, paint a picture for us. What are you seeing right now? Tell us what's going on.
Hey, Chuck, I think this is what we're looking at right now. So we're looking at a 6 p.m. first date. Essentially, session on the Capitol.
Vaughn, it is. Yeah, Vaughn, we hear you. I know you're talking. We got tough audio, and this has been tough all day. I get that. Let's. Why don't we see if we can fix that? Let me go to Yasmin Vasugian, if we can. If Yas, actually, let me move there. Let's go to Igor Bobek. He's Igor Bobek. at the Huffington Post, and if you've been on Twitter and seen some of the first early pictures of what was going on inside the Capitol, it was courtesy of pictures from Igor Bobek. So, Igor, you were there in the first moments when this breach, it appears, occurred. Take me through the scene there when it all first started to happen.
Thanks, Chuck. Well, I was in the middle of reporting on today's certification vote for the 2020 election when I heard a commotion, I heard yelling, and I ran down to the first floor of the Senate where I encountered, I was stunned to encounter a group of protesters trying to make their way up the steps into the Senate, to the second floor of the Senate. And I saw this police officer courageously try to hold them off with nothing but a baton, but was ultimately unable to do so. And the protesters chased them up the steps where there was a sort of a standoff, and right steps away from the Senate floor. These protesters were carrying Confederate flags. They were yelling traitors. They were saying that, you know, they needed to stop this from happening in order to make Trump president. Really just shocking scenes. At one point, a few of them got into the Senate chamber itself and got up to the day where Mike Pence was presiding minutes earlier to take photos and to scream that this was Donald Trump's election. It's really stunning scenes.
You know, Igor, I'm seeing you caught some pictures. There clearly is some Capitol Police that was there at the time. Were they aggressively trying to push them back, or did they feel overwhelmed, or what could you observe at the time? How are the Capitol Police handling what they had? Were they just overwhelmed?
I think initially they were overwhelmed and unaware, frankly, some of them, that protesters had gotten into the Capitol. You know, I took this video of this lone police officer trying to hold back this group of 15 to 20 protesters, and finally receive the backup, yelling that, you know, they've gotten in. When he did receive backup, they tried to de-escalate the situation, tried to talk to them to calm them down, but ultimately they would not leave, and eventually roamed across the Capitol into the rotunda and into the Senate chamber itself.
Igor, are you safe? Where are you right now?
I am safe, thank you. I'm at a secure location. I'm outside the Capitol. I'm holding here, and we're all trying to see what comes next tonight.
Well, Igor Bobek, thanks for sharing your photos with the world, getting us these photos. There's a lot more we need to unpack with this. You stay safe, and of course, thank you for your brave reporting. Let me bring in Hakeem Jeffries. He's a member of the Democratic leadership, Democrat from New York. And Congressman, we got a report that you and Congresswoman Liz Cheney had been sort of reassuring the leadership and reassuring members that this process is going to go forward, that these terrorists are not going to stop, if you will, this process. Do you have an idea of when the Capitol is going to be safe for your return? Yeah, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, are you with us, sir? It's my understanding we have you on the phone. Can you hear us? There we go. Congressman. Okay. Well, let me check in here with Hallie Jackson and see what we're hearing inside this West Wing right now. Hallie, is anybody getting through to the president?
Well, I think the clearest evidence that at least the president did something, and there will be a lot of discussion of what that something was that taped message that we heard from him just within the last maybe hour or so. Clearly, there had been people coalescing around the president. His allies were very public about this. Even some of his closest Republican allies very publicly on other networks, on Twitter, were saying, you have got to say something. Some of the most forceful comments came from the president's former communications director, a senior official inside the White House, inside the West Wing. Her name is Alyssa Farah. Chuck, her name might be familiar to Beltway insiders. She used to work for Mark Meadows, who then became the chief of staff. And she issued this sort of impassioned plea saying to MAGA country, I am one of you, and this is not okay. This has to stop. You have to go home. The president has to speak up about this. We obviously heard that statement from him that, you know, said, sure, go home, but in the next breath said, we love you. You're special. I understand you're hurt. This election was stolen. It, of course, was not stolen. This is a crisis point for President Trump. He has now cleared the sort of bar of speaking publicly, right? The bar that was sort of set by his allies, by people like President-elect Joe Biden. But this is a president, Chuck, as you know, who is defiant as a personal defining characteristic and trait of his, right? And so what does he see? And importantly, Chuck, what is he hearing in the coverage of what he's seeing? This is a president who is at times and rather frequently influenced by some of what he hears in the media from, for example, media allies. And so that is something, you know, the president, he is very visual. He watches television. You know that's what he's doing now and how he's getting these images. We have, in our White House team, reaching out, obviously working sources. What's he being briefed on? What's happening? We heard from the press secretary when the National Guard was activated. I think in the eyes of some critics, that took a little too long, right? We were watching these images for a while before it became clear that the National Guard would be going in. But now it seems like there is a little bit more action. There's a little bit more movement. But I have to tell you, it's getting dark in D.C. This is a point where law enforcement has to get a handle on what's happening here. And then there's a question of what the actual process is, Chuck. The whole process we were talking about, the Electoral College count, moving forward. How does that unfold? I've talked to another source on the Republican side whose hope was that some of these Republican senators, specifically, who had objections, would perhaps think twice before doing that and before pursuing that, given what we've seen unfold.
I would think that at least Mitch McConnell is going to attempt to have that conversation with Mr. Hawley and probably Mr. Cruz, among others. I think we have Vaughn Hilliard's connection now better for us. And Vaughn, Hallie just brought up an important point. The sun is setting. The sun essentially has set in Washington, D.C. Vaughn, what do you see out there? And do you feel the law enforcement presence yet?
Chuck, I think you just heard part of the law enforcement presence. There hasn't been a serious effort except for the last 15 minutes here. We are just a half hour away from the curfew here in Washington, D.C., and you can see some of the lights flashing up towards the Capitol. It was just about 15 minutes ago, Chuck, that the first tear gas was dispensed. You've seen flashbang grenades. Over the course of these last hours, what you saw were thousands of individuals as this insurrection took place here at the United States Capitol watching. You can see over to my left, our great photographer, Paul Rigney, is behind the camera here. And this is what you've seen here over the course of the last 15 minutes. It's a systematic push to push people away here from the scene. You saw Capitol Police work their way down and pick individuals up one at a time physically from their seats up on what is the inaugural platform. That platform is typically not there. It's just been constructed in the last weeks. That is where members of Congress, former presidents, members of the president's family sit during the swearing in of the president of the United States. This is where Joe Biden should be sworn in just 2 weeks from now. But what you have seen over the course of these last hours is thousands of people hold firm here at this very moment here. And now what you're seeing is tear gas and smoke being used to push people back. I got to tell you, Chuck, one gentleman just came up to me right before we went live to you. He said, if our voices are not heard today, you'll hear our muskets tomorrow. Again, there is no police presence outside of the Capitol Police that you see up literally on the steps of the Capitol. We've been here for hours. There was a medical emergency and there was frankly nobody to turn to. There's questions of at what point does the National Guard come in? But literally the shot that you are seeing up on the United States Capitol is the extent of the police presence here at the heart of the United States. And it's been quite a sight to see. Again, we're just a half hour away.
So you have not seen...
You're from that curfew here, and you're seeing that first effort here from the police.
So you're not seeing any public police sort of where you're behind your cameraman right now. That is not there. They are not trying to disperse from there as well, or are you we see some, are we seeing riot gear? I think he may have caught something there.
you're seeing the push here from the police that have been dispersing that gas and the smoke there. You actually see that police line, I should say, as we're watching this in real time with you here, Chuck, pushing people down. Those are the steps.
There it is.
That's the walkway, I should say, from the United States Capitol down here to where you see essentially hit the National Mall that leads you over to the Washington Monument. And again, this is literally the first police presence that you have seen pushing people here away. I guess you could say there was maybe more than 10,000 people here earlier today, and it was the likes of Congressman Mo Brooks, Chuck, who literally took the mic at that rally that the president appeared at earlier and said, today is the day that patriots will begin taking names and kicking ass. And what you have seen here is essentially thousands be able to take over these grounds, and not until the sun went down, finally a pushback and an effort to disperse these individuals here on January 6th.
I'm noticing I'll be honest, it's still sometimes, and you know, I was watching this all day as well. We were on Capitol Hill. We've gotten a bit safer now, but there's not a lot of urgency. It feels. And it doesn't feel these protesters think that they have to leave anytime soon.
No, the ground was essentially ceded to them here. The streets of D.C. have been essentially all but quiet except for these protesters that have been walking about here. You know, there was a sign that was up attached. You saw not only Trump 2020 hanging from the scaffolding here of the United States Capitol, but there was another sign off to the left, another from one of those structures that was built for Inauguration Day, in which it said, "We the people," and it said, "We will bring D.C. to its knees." And you know, today they did. They stopped this process from going forward here. They essentially locked down the U.S. Senate. They locked down the U.S. House. Yeah. And it was a law enforcement presence that was not prepared. And the question is, at what point will these final, I mean, I hate to use this language, but essentially this last stand be kiboshed here. Again, a half hour away, but you still have at least 1,000, 2,000 people up here, up here on the west end of the U.S. Capitol that are holding firm. It's a matter of what does this next half hour look like, and what does the Washington, D.C. look like tonight and also tomorrow.
The curfew, you keep referencing it, 27 minutes is when the curfew hits. Vaughn, stick around. We want to keep your shot up. Pete Williams, I want to bring him back. Pete, you've got a better idea of what, we've seen some pictures. They clearly are trying to do some disbursement. We know that there is an FBI SWAT team in the Capitol. What is happening right now that we don't see?
And a National Guard movement on the way, should be arriving there shortly, we're told, and then they'll coordinate and begin to push people out, do a final clear of the building and get them off the grounds. That's the overall plan. Meantime, Chuck, back inside the Capitol, I just talked to a member of the Senate leadership who said that they haven't decided yet whether they will try to do this. First of all, they are determined to continue the count tonight. They want to keep going. They're defiant. They want to make the point that they can't be stopped. The only question is whether they do it in the secure location, which is outside the Capitol building, but on the Capitol grounds where they are now, where most of them are. The leadership is in a separate place. That's McConnell, Schumer, and Chuck Grassley, who's the president pro tem, as well, we believe, is the vice president, who we think is still up on the Capitol grounds. The question is whether they would do it in their secure locations, or would they try to go back to the House floor or back to the Senate floor. So that's question one. Mm-hmm. Question two is, when they resume, what are they going to do? They have to finish and vote on the objection to the Arizona ballots. That was what caused them to go their separate chambers in the first place. I'm told that the objecting senators are now meeting and deciding whether to simply say, okay, that was enough, we made our point, or whether they also want to object to the votes from other states when this continues. But the mood that I got from this member of the leadership reflecting what this person said was the view of all 97 senators who were there is, we're not leaving till we finish.
And so do we have a sense, and do you have a sense from your law enforcement sources, when do they think they could get operational control inside the Capitol?
I don't think they have any idea, because They have to make sure it's clear. They have to sweep it for potential explosive devices. And that's not just, you know, being prudent. There were a number of explosive devices or potential explosive devices found outside the building on the Capitol grounds today. I just don't know how many, but more than one or two, I'm told. And whether they were all working or not, I don't know, but they're taking no chances. So, you know, that would take a while. They don't know how long that would take, and that's why they haven't decided whether they'll just try to pick it up where they are. They've all been fed. They're, you know, they're safe. The mood is generally good but defiant. And so they're waiting, I think, trying to get a read about how long it would take. I don't think anybody knows how long it would take to get the Senate back in shape for them to go back.
Right. And have they thought about, you said that they were thinking about they might do it in their secure location.
Right.
I assume they would want to publicly record that in some way. Is that something they've thought about, how to sort of make sure it's in the public record, I guess? Is the
Yeah, I wondered about that too, because yeah, I think they haven't gotten around to that, is the sense I got. I mean, obviously when they're in the Senate and House floor, we have the facilities to be able to hear and see what they're doing. I suspect they don't want to do this in secret. They want it to be, you know, they want to show that they're doing the work. And I think that's one of the reasons why they thought about wanting to go back to the Senate chamber.
Yeah, Pete Williams with an important update there, and noting that it is a defiant group of United States senators, at least, that want to get this done, and that maybe the objectors are going to talk about standing down. We shall see. Let me go back to Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, we're seeing more live shots there. It definitely looks like there. I think I know that guard gate where those stairs are. Looks like finally a police presence is taking at least some control of some part of the Capitol.
Chuck, what you're seeing here is the police line here that pushed people away here. Finally, you're dealing with about a final 1,000 or two here right before us here. I'm going to have Paul just turn around here if we couldn't just get a shot of the U.S. Capitol. Yep. And they're asking us to move out, Chuck, and we will. You can see where the U.S. Capitol was, and you see this is Metropolitan Police Department here. Yep. Just a half hour until that curfew, finally pushing people back here. And again, though, there's still about 1,000 or 2,000 people up near that scaffolding of the inauguration platform that still are there. As to how those individuals are going to be pushed back, I'm not sure. But what you're seeing here is those Metropolitan Police Department going back and systematically pushing people back here, Chuck.
Are you seeing, how uncooperative are some of these protesters being, or are they starting to listen to the police?
When you use tear gas and flash grenades and pepper spray, it forces one to become a little bit more, or a little less resistant here.
Coming out. Thank you. Let's go. Thank you.
But again, I just got to put into context here, you know, there was at least, I think there was at least a 10,000 or plus outside here earlier here when there was essentially no police operation to be seen. But then what you see now is maybe 1,000, 2,000 people here for sort of this final last stand as the police department pushes people back.
All right, that's Vaughn Hilliard outside the Capitol, where he himself is also getting pushed back a little bit as they try to gain some control. Vaughn, please keep safe. Let me check in with Leanne Caldwell, one of our congressional correspondents. She, of course, is inside the Capitol. So, Leanne, any updates? What are you hearing internally about when they think they're going to have control of this building?
So, Chuck, the lockdown is still in place. I am in one of the House office buildings where I've been relegated for most of the day ever since the evacuation started. I was in the Cannon House office building, which was the first to be evacuated this afternoon, right when the proceedings began over in the House floor in the House chamber. So what I just saw walking down the hall was a big contingent of Capitol Police officers moving. Of course, they don't tell you where you're going. And they did say, though, that the lockdown is still in place. As far as what is happening now, it seems like the Capitol is mostly empty from staff. Everyone we know has been removed and escorted from the Capitol into other places of the Capitol complex. So we don't have good eyes at this point on what is exactly happening inside the Capitol. But, you know, this is just something that is, you know, many people have said this on air today, that has just been unheard of, unseen here. I've covered the Hill for a long time. I'm aging myself, but I was actually in the Capitol during 9/11 and had to evacuate the Capitol then. Back then we were told to go outside. This time we were told to stay in and we can't leave the building. But Von Hilliard just talked about Mo Brooks, one of the people who were leading the opposition here inside Congress, this electoral college vote count. Well, he put out a statement just moments ago, and in that statement, and as Von said, he was at the Trump rally earlier today telling people to go and kick some asses. Well, in his new statement, he goes on, he has a little bit of a change of tune to say, I'm sorry, I'm pulling it up right here.
Take your time.
He says, while our election system has major systemic flaws that he says socialist Democrats egregiously exploited in 2020, he goes on to say that election system is still far and away the best place to change the direction and destiny of America. So he doesn't say if he is going to continue to object once they resume this process. But he does have a bit of a change of tune from what he had just hours ago when he was riling up the crowd. And I will say one more thing, Chuck. I am talking to a lot of sources who, you know, Republican sources who even want to make sure that this is completed, that this process in the House floor is completed.
Right.
And some of these members who say that, who were opposed to it, say it's going to be very interesting to see which ones continue to go forward with their objections.
Right. Yeah. I think it's really hard to justify it at this point. Leanne Caldwell, I'm glad I get you on to make sure your family knows you're all well and safe as well. So Leanne, thank you. Let me go back onto the street on the outside of the Capitol. That's where Yasmin Vasugian is. Yasmin, tell me what you're seeing from your vantage point right now.
So Chuck, you and I spoke a couple hours ago. Since then, it was really chaotic. Now things have dialed back a little bit. The D.C. Metro Police, they've managed to push the protesters all the way off the Capitol Hill lawn. So just a couple of hours ago, as we were broadcasting, right, there were thousands of folks. I mean, you could see them up on the Capitol Hill steps. They were trying to breach the Capitol. They got inside the Capitol, as we well know. But then we saw those flashbangs. We saw the tear gas being dispersed, and they were trying to push those protesters, those rioters, off of the Capitol Hill steps. We were there to see it all. We saw these major flashbangs coming out of the Capitol building, and then the police and the Capitol Police, along with the D.C. Metro Police, they began to push the rioters and the protesters back off of the Capitol Hill steps gradually. And this is kind of formulaic for them. This is something they do. This is something that we've seen throughout the summer with all the protests that happened with Black Lives Matter movement across the country as well, in which they form these police signs. And I'm going to step away and let Miguel shoot it for you. They form these police signs lines that you see behind me of D.C. Metro Police, and they gradually push the protesters and the rioters back to retreat from the Capitol Hill building. And that's what they've been doing for the last hour or so as we creep closer and closer. I don't know what time it is right now. It's around, we're hovering around 6 p.m., which is when there's going to be the curfew in place for the D.C. area, as the mayor said a little bit earlier. But gradually, with this police line behind me, they've been pushing the protesters and rioters back for the last hour or so, in which more protesters and more rioters disperse. I mean, we've gone from thousands upon thousands, Chuck, of people that were out here on the mall to now just a couple of hundred. And I will say they are getting in the face of a lot of these D.C. Metro Police, confronting them, angry with them, but the police are kind of maintaining calm for now throughout this entire thing. So we're watching it develop. It has been quite a couple hours, Chuck.
Yasmin, I'm curious. I know you've had interactions with some of these protesters and some of these rioters. What are they saying? How are they responding to now? I think they now see they're a pretty negative symbol for America right now.
Gosh, it's interesting. You know, earlier today, the three questions I asked were this. I said, why are you out here? What do you want to see happen? What do you want the vice president to do in addition to that question? And my third question was, why aren't you wearing a mask? Because amidst 350,000 folks that have died in this country, a lot of folks are not wearing masks here. And I thought it was an important question to ask folks, and they felt like it was an infringement upon their personal liberty. That's what a lot of the people have been saying to me out here. The answer to the first question is they feel like the election has been stolen, when we well know that that is not true. Secondly, they wanted the vice president to step up, as they've said. They said the vice president needs to turn this election. The vice president needs to change the results of this election. And I mentioned to them that ahead of the joint session, the vice president put out a letter essentially saying that he doesn't have the authority per the Constitution to overturn the results of this election. And they said, well, that's not true. We believe he actually has that authority. Later on, as we talked about the folks breaching the halls of the Capitol, I said, is this what you wanted to see happen? When you got inside, what did you actually want to do? I talked to a man who was able to breach the halls of the Capitol, who actually got inside and then was pushed back by the Capitol Police with tear gas. And he said to me, I just want things to change. I just wanted to get in there because I want things to change. I feel like this election was not fair. And then he went on to say this, Chuck. He said, this is all we can do because we feel like the election was stolen. I said, but someone's been hurt. Someone's been shot. Do you still feel like it's warranted? Yeah. And he said, yes. And I heard that from a lot of folks, which is quite frankly, very troubling, to say the least. And then he went on to say this, Chuck.
It is. And
he said, next time it might be worse, and that's tough. Yeah.
Well, sadly, that person who's been shot, we now know has died. And so it has even gotten deadlier. Yasmin Vasugian, thank you. And I believe my pal Savannah Guthrie is back. Welcome back, Savannah.
Thank you. And with that disturbing news that the person who was shot earlier at the Capitol has lost her life, let's go to Pete Williams, who's collecting more information on that. Pete, what can you tell us?
Well, we still don't have the identity of the woman. We're told that she was shot in the chest earlier this afternoon inside the Capitol by someone in law enforcement, but we haven't yet heard whether that was U.S. Capitol Police, who are always on the scene, or whether it's someone from the city police department, known here as the Metropolitan Police Department, whether that was who was responsible for firing the shot, nor do we know where inside the Capitol building the shot was fired or why, whether it was in the process of defending the House of Representatives from the people who were trying to smash their way in or what. But the person was shot, taken, aid was immediately rendered. She was taken to a nearby hospital, and a short time ago, we learned that she has died, and I'm sure we'll get her identity here in a little while.
All right, Pete, thank you so much. Let's go back outside and see what's transpiring there. Yasmin Vasugian, our correspondent on the ground. Yasmin, what are you seeing now?
Yeah, hi, Savannah. So, just listening to you guys talk about this woman who has been shot inside the Capitol halls, and unbelievable to hear that. Nonetheless, we're getting pushed back further and further. As I was talking to Chuck a little bit earlier, the D.C. Metro Police basically set up a line here, and this is formulaic for them. This is something they learned how to do, right? This is the way that they push protesters and rioters back in situations like this. This is how they disperse crowds. We've seen this over and over again in situations like this, as we saw over the summer with the Black Lives Matter protests, and they're doing it here again, and it's working. I mean, there were thousands upon thousands of folks in the mall area throughout the last couple of hours. We saw people breaching the Capitol building a little bit earlier. There is nobody up there now. It is completely emptied, completely quiet, and D.C. Metro Police have managed to push everybody back with, every couple of minutes. They basically form a line and push everybody back. Since we saw the tear gas used on the Capitol steps about an hour or so ago, since then we've really seen no more tear gas or flashbangs used to push and disperse the crowd. Instead, it has been this lineup of D.C. Metro Police. They came in just about 30 to 45 minutes ago. We saw them come in from both sides of the Capitol and set up this lineup. And with that, the rioters and the protesters did begin to disperse. So it seems as if so far, because we're just minutes away from this curfew coming into place, that so far the residents of Washington and, of course, the protesters and rioters are heeding these calls for this curfew, because so many people, it seems like, have gone for now, right? But so many of the folks that I've been speaking throughout the day have said to me, essentially, this is not the end. And they want to see change happen. So it's really just a matter of waiting and seeing, Savannah, what's coming next.
Yasmin, thank you. Be safe out there. We're about 9 minutes away from the official start of the curfew in Washington, D.C., this extraordinary measure that the mayor there has had to put into place because of the riots that we saw today at the United States Capitol. Let's go to Casey Hunt. Casey, I understand there's been an announcement of some sort at the Capitol.
That's right, Savannah. We heard over the loudspeaker something of a buzzing siren type noise, and then you could hear a loud announcement that informed everyone here of the curfew, saying that the curfew is in effect at 1800 hours. That's, of course, 6 p.m. Eastern time. All individuals must leave the U.S. Capitol complex or be subject to arrest. So we are, as we have said all day long, in the Senate office building, the Russell Senate office building, which is across the street from the U.S. Capitol. So we heard it here in Russell. Now, I'm not sure exactly how it would have been communicated to crowds outside the Capitol. Our reporters there obviously would have been the ones to hear that. But if we heard it here, that would indicate it was also broadcast throughout the Capitol system. There is an alert system that's built in here. We hear them from time to time for drills, or if there are, on occasion, there are suspicious packages that prompt an evacuation of an office building or something along those lines. But of course, this is the message that's being delivered here about 5:50 or so p.m. to everyone that's at the Capitol, that the curfew is in effect and that if they don't leave, they will be subject to arrest. So as we've been reporting, a number of different law enforcement agencies on site here, this announcement suggests to me they may be stepping up arrests as they start to try and get a handle on this situation. And Savannah, I also want to circle back to something that we've been talking about throughout the afternoon, and that is this determination to get the business of our government back underway. And I would say at this hour, I'm still texting back and forth with a number of members, both of the House and the Senate, as they try to figure out what those plans are. And I do think that we should expect that determination not to falter. I think the plans are still in the works, and I think that everyone seems to be in agreement in both houses and on both sides of the aisle that it's very clear that a message be sent to it's very clear to them that it's important that a message be sent to Americans that the government will continue to function even in the face of this. So stay tuned for more developments on that front, Savannah.
All right, Casey, thank you so much. Let's turn to Kristen Welker, our White House correspondent. Kristen, we saw the president's taped message a few moments ago. What are you hearing at the White House?
Well, Savannah, a number of White House officials, a number of former White House officials and allies to President Trump are pressuring him to, frankly, go further than he did in that taped statement that was released a short time ago, in which he reiterated those false claims of voter fraud, but did call for peace, urged his supporters not to resort to violence. But I can tell you that there is a push right now to get the president to come out and speak and to say something forceful, to make a strong statement, to essentially say, stand down. And it comes as we are hearing from some of his former officials on Twitter, Alyssa Farah, one of them, who essentially says, I am one of you to the MAGA world, as she puts it. She says, before I worked for the president, I worked for Mark Meadows, Jim Jordan, and she goes on to say, I need you to hear me. The election was not stolen. We lost. Strong statements also from Mick Mulvaney, the former chief of staff here, as well as Kellyanne Conway, one of the former top advisors to President Trump, who are essentially urging the president to come out and to make a strong statement and urging the people who stormed the Capitol to stand down. So that is the scene here. I was just speaking to a number of top officials. I can tell you they are watching these developments unfold. President Trump himself watching these developments unfold, Savannah, and it's not clear that he has any plans or any intentions to come out and speak this evening. But I can tell you that there is is a somber mood here at the White House, and frankly, a number of officials have a stricken look on their face as they watch all of this unfold, of course, coming just hours after President Trump addressed a crowd of thousands and essentially reiterated those false claims of fraud, tried to pressure his own Vice President, Mike Pence, to take actions that he cannot take under the law to block the election results from being counted and from announcing the winner as Joe Biden. And there is a sense that in that speech, the president was riling up his supporters, and now this is what has come from a day and weeks of a lot of energy toward trying to relitigate this election. So, Savannah, I can just tell you the pressure is mounting here on President Trump to do more.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty extraordinary to hear from former officials who were diehards, who worked for the president until those last moments, to say it's enough, it's over. What about Vice President Pence? Of course, he was over there at the Capitol presiding over the Senate at this time, and the last best information we had was that he was still there, that it was not safe for him to even go that short distance back to the White House. Have you heard anything about his whereabouts, any update?
That is the latest that we know, Savannah, that, of course, he, as well as the members of Congress, the senators there, were, of course, evacuated to safer grounds at the Capitol, but that it wasn't safe for them to leave. And I would just underscore a point that Casey has made, which is that there is a determination to try to see these proceedings through to the end once it is safe to go back and try to do the business of the government to count the Electoral College votes to declare the winner of the presidential election. And so it is our understanding that that is where he continues to huddle. But it's quite remarkable what we witnessed from the vice president today, Savannah. Once these proceedings got underway, we saw the vice president, one of the president's staunchest allies, break with him, really for the first time publicly, and to say that he does not believe that the Constitution gives him the authority to in any way try to block the vote count. And so breaking with the president in that very public way and making it clear to the president, making it clear to the American people that that's how he viewed his role, and that is how he planned to proceed and will proceed once these proceedings get underway. And so a really stark, dramatic development there. And it's also worth noting that the Senate's top Republican, Mitch McConnell, also broke with President Trump today and said flatly that there just was not the type of massive, widespread fraud that the president is trying to suggest that there was, and that essentially the country's democracy will head toward a death spiral if elections are litigated and relitigated in this type of manner, Savannah.
All right, Kristen, stand by. Thank you so much. I want to go to Pete Williams. Pete, we are starting to see some more aggressive action on the part of law enforcement to kind of disperse the crowd. We've seen the crowd diminish. What have you learned about the decision-making that's gone on in terms of how to respond to this afternoon?
Sure. Well, let me come back to that, if I may, and answer the question about the vice president first. The initial thought was, when this all happened, let's get the vice president out of here. The Secret Service, as I understand it, concluded that there really was no safe way to get him out of the building and away, so he remained there. Now he's staying there because the Senate wants to continue. At least the senators in the House want to keep going tonight, and he has to preside. He is required by the Constitution to preside. So I think the reason he's still there is that at first they didn't know what they were going to do but couldn't get him out of there. Now they want to continue with the count, so he has to stay there to preside over it. So that's the answer to that question. Now, we've gotten a lot of people that have asked us, Savannah, and I'm sure many of our viewers have wondered the same thing, why aren't the police making arrests? These people went into the Capitol, they violated a number of different federal laws, they damaged property, they trespassed, they disrupted, they did all kinds of things. Why aren't we seeing more arrests? Now, we don't have a definitive answer to the question of whether there was a strategy or a decision made by the Capitol Police or Metro Police, who were initially on the scene, simply not to do that because they felt they were outmanned. I suspect that's it, that they just felt that their main goal was to try to preserve whatever the safety of the members first. But I think the feeling that I've gotten from talking to other law enforcement people watching this is, yes, the people in the building were overwhelmed, weren't able to stop and start making arrests. They were severely outnumbered, and that, however, a lot of those people that were there are eventually going to be charged and may not realize this, but you know, there's pictures like that, the one we're looking at right now. There are video cameras inside the building. There are all these pictures that law enforcement will be going over now and trying to identify these people and run them down and arrest them and charge them with a number of different offenses. So I think it looks odd to think that these people are simply being escorted off the grounds. And I've had law enforcement people say, I can't believe what I'm seeing, that they're not being arrested. But what we're told is charges ultimately will be filed on a lot of these people. Now, clearly, it would be a lot better if they could just arrest them on the spot. But I think the feeling was the law enforcement initially was simply outnumbered.
Well, that I think is the real point. What's really disturbing is that they weren't able to be stopped and thwarted. The chief of police in D.C. said that some of the protesters did use violence against police, but as we've observed as the afternoon has worn on, it is not exactly a surprise that this protest was going on, that there had been talk of this kind of activity, and so, you know, there will be a lot of questions in the coming days about why there wasn't a better response. That's for another day. We're still in a crisis right here. This is the nation's capital on an evening like no other, where protesters were able to breach the security as Congress met in a joint session to perform one of its most sacred constitutional duties, to certify electors, to ensure the peaceful transfer of power to a new president. And instead, what we saw was rioters breach the gates, come through the building, make it onto the Senate floor, the House floor, stroll through Statuary Hall as though they were on a visitor's tour. Congress stopped. The members of Congress evacuated. They are still in a secure location. So as we hit 6 o'clock on the East Coast, there is a curfew going into effect on the streets of Washington, D.C., as law enforcement tries to catch up and get this situation under control. We've heard from the president-elect and we've heard from President Trump. And we now turn to Leon Panetta, who, of course, is the former defense secretary under the Obama administration, a former White House chief of staff going back to the Clinton administration, and a former congressman who knows that building well. Secretary Panetta, I guess just before we get into the security measures, I just want your gut, how you feel at this hour, seeing the images that we've all been watching.
Savannah, the scenes that I've seen today are the most disturbing events that I've seen in my entire public life. I never expected to see rioters take over the Capitol of the United States, stop our democracy from functioning, and basically undermine the very form of government that depends on both order and freedom. And to see that happen is something I thought I would never see in my lifetime.
And the business of the Congress must go on. We're told from our reporting from inside the room that senators and members of Congress are very focused, almost defiant in their feeling that they have an obligation to go on and continue this work, even if it goes late into tonight. What do you know about, without giving away anything, what do you know about the plans that would have been in place for something like this? I mean, I talked about it a little bit with Secretary Napolitano earlier in our coverage, saying, you know, I'm sure you had plans on the shelf for an attack on our Congress. You probably didn't imagine that it would come from inside, from Americans, from our very own people.
Well, as you may know, I signed a letter with all 10 of the former living defense secretaries that raised the concern about the possibility that something like this might raise the issue of using the military in order to change the results of an election, and we cautioned against that. But it was clear at the time that there are those that were going to conduct this kind of protest. The president obviously was saying things to incite what we saw today. Everybody knew that, in fact, that something like this was very possible. And I'm a little surprised, very frankly, that sufficient steps were not taken to secure the Capitol and to make sure that something like this did not happen.
And Secretary Panetta, just bring you up to date because the president tweeted about 7 minutes ago, and this is what he said. These are the things and events that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away from great patriots who have been badly and unfairly treated for so long. Go home with love and in peace. Remember this day forever. How does that statement strike you?
It strikes me as not only irresponsible, but undermining the very role that he should be playing as President of the United States, which is to make very clear that this kind of behavior is unacceptable, that it violates every principle of law and order that he said he stands for, and further undermines the very democracy that he has sworn to uphold as President of the United States. What he's saying is not helpful to the law enforcement people that are there now, trying to make sure that they clear the Capitol and allow it to get back to the business of our democracy. It only goes to show that ultimately, as he leaves office, he will bear responsibility for what we saw today.
Secretary Panetta, is this a turning point? I mean, after everything that's transpired and, you know, things that have happened that have never happened before, and life just seems to go on as usual. But this is different. Do you feel that this will be a turning point in which members of Congress, your former colleagues, Republicans and Democrats stand up and say, enough is enough? Or is this just going to be just another day in the Trump administration?
Well, I don't think this can be passed off as just another day. What we saw happen to the Capitol of the United States and what we saw happen in terms of the interruption of our system of government is a serious event. And I worry that if we don't take steps to come together and govern this country, that the scenes we saw today will inspire others to take advantage of the situation. This is a serious moment in our history, and we ought not to just excuse it as just somehow, some kind of protest. A line was crossed today, and that line represents whether or not our democracy is going to function in the future or whether it's going to be held under siege in the future. And the leadership of this country will determine the answer to that question.
And Secretary Panetta, before I let you go, you're the former CIA director, your former Defense Department, the Secretary of Defense. When you think about our adversaries around the world, watching these scenes, what goes through your mind?
It's a terrible message that's going out because our adversaries will see what we have seen today and just sense it as another sign of weakness on the part of the United States. And I worry that because of those scenes, that our adversaries will use that to take advantage of the United States. This is not a good moment in terms of the image of the United States and the values that we represent. It's a moment where we are very vulnerable to those that want to undermine our democracy.
Secretary Panetta, thank you for your time, sir. We appreciate it. I want to turn to our correspondent, Yasmin Vsugin, who's on the grounds of the Capitol, and we're seeing in the images on your screen that we are starting to see more law enforcement activity. This curfew in Washington, D.C. has been underway for about 10 minutes now. Yasmin, what changes have you witnessed?
Yeah, so Savannah, we walked east to west. We were on the east side when I was talking to you a little bit earlier, and then we walked all the way to the west side of the Capitol. And there's about 3 to 4 separate police lines in trying to disperse the crowd. If you'd asked me 2 hours ago if by 6 p.m. the thousands of people that were here would have been dispersed, I would not have necessarily believed you. But now, 2 hours later, at 6 p.m., there's literally almost nobody here at this point. I mean, yeah, you are seeing a lot of folks still out here and still seeing the police presence, as you can see, pushing us back away from the perimeter of the Capitol, but we're already off the Capitol Hill front lawn. And then, just a little bit earlier, before you came to me, I saw about 25 or so FBI guys walking into the area. Sorry, we just want to make sure that we get out of the way and we're not getting in the way of any of the police activity to make sure they're able to get their jobs done. Obviously, we want to make sure that's the number one priority here, so I'm stepping away a little bit. But these guys, the DC Metro Police, still pushing folks back, wanting everybody here to heed with the 6 p.m. curfew that's now in place in the city, Savannah. And as I mentioned, the FBI, watch out for the bike behind you, the FBI now on site in front of the Capitol building on a day in which, you know, is usually pro forma during an election season, just 2 weeks away from when President-elect Joe Biden will be inaugurated at this very site. And I just want to mention one other note here, Savannah, that I've mentioned throughout the day, but the Capitol was set up for the inauguration already. When we arrived here earlier today, you saw bleachers on both sides of the Capitol. You saw the inauguration balcony in which President-elect Joe Biden on January 20th will walk out and be sworn in as the next president of the United States. Today, that setup, the area in which they have put in place for that inauguration on January 20th, was filled with rioters and protesters. And it was a sight that I don't think any of us could have imagined that we would see. And again, the police trying to push folks back, make sure that protesters, rioters, folks that are here are behind the line, Savannah. So I'll send it back to you for now. But again, there's definitely some more police presence at this point to make sure that the citizens and the folks in this area are abiding by the 6 p.m. curfew, Savannah.
Yeah, this is very much an unfolding situation. Yasmin, you're brave, and we're grateful for you being there as this law enforcement starts to move in and enforce this 6 o'clock curfew and try to get this situation under control. And as we speak, you look at the United States Capitol on this night, you have members of Congress, senators, and Congress members who are sheltered in place, locked down, unable to leave, unable to perform their constitutional duties because of a throng of protesters turned rioters who breached the grounds of the Capitol and stopped democracy. But if I have Casey Hunt with me, they have not stopped it, they have paused it, because there is very much a feeling on Capitol Hill from our sources in the room, where some senators are gathered in the same room watching this coverage, some members of Congress gathered together watching this same coverage. There's a feeling, a defiant feeling, that the business of this country will be done, even at nightfall, no matter what it takes. Andrea Mitchell, you are a longtime correspondent in Washington. It goes without saying that there has never been a night like this. What are your sources telling you about what happens next and whether this sacred duty can be performed by the United States Congress under these circumstances?
Well, I just got a text from Congresswoman Debbie Dingell from Michigan, and you know how long she has been not only in the Hill, but of course before her, her late husband, John Dingell, was the longest-serving member of Congress when he retired, and she then replaced him in the House. And she says, this has been a total nightmare. I was on the floor. I hear the gunshots, smelled the tear gas, and I will be damned if he will keep us from doing our job. We will go back and do it tonight. I asked, are you doing it tonight? Does it have to be done on the House floor or in the safe location where we know they are together, they are safe? And she says, it will be done on the House floor. And I said, is this reportable and can I attribute it to you? And she said, yes. So that is the defiance from a member of Congress, notably from Michigan, which of course has seen the protests storming the Capitol there, the State House. She's very close to Governor Whitmer there, and we know the threats there that the governor has endured. And there is a strong Michigan contingent, we've been told by law enforcement, to some of the groups who are here today. In any case, the defiance of Debbie Dingell, who has a very good check on the pulse of her fellow Democratic caucus members is, I think, very, very widespread. We heard this earlier from the senators, according to Pete Williams, who was reporting that they also want to get this done tonight. And I think they're going to try to do it no matter how late they stay up. And as you well know, I covered the Hill. When they have deadlines and they have big business to do at the end of a session, they do stay all night. Healthcare was passed at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, and law enforcement seems to be attempting to clear the deck so that that can take place. We'll keep an eye on that. Keep working your sources, Andrea. I want to turn to Republican Congressman Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma, who is still at the Capitol and locked down in his office. Sir, first of all, I'm glad to see that you're okay and you're able to call in. What was your experience today?
Well, first of all, there wasn't any shots that was fired in the House chamber. I know guns were drawn. I was right there when they broke the glass. It did sound like gunshots, and for those that haven't heard it, and which I'm glad a lot of people haven't heard gunshots like that, unfortunately I have. I recognized it immediately, and there was definitely tear gas, but the tear gas was in the rotunda, nothing biased. Listen, it was very tense. It should have never happened at all, but our Capitol Police and the Sergeant at Arms, law enforcement, did a phenomenal job showing restraint and actually keeping the members safe. These guys have families too, and they did their best to protect us. They were strongly outnumbered, which is why I stood there with them, and we made sure that the chamber was completely clear. The members got out, the staff got out, and at the end of the day, the protesters were completely, and I actually want to use the word agitators. The agitators were completely out of line.
Yeah, and Congressman, I mean, you're a Republican, you're a Trump supporter, and as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were someone who was wanting to object to certifying the elector. So we know where you stand politically. This, it seems to me, is a different issue. You're talking about people breaking the law, coming into the United States Congress, and stopping the business of America. Do you feel that what the president said today to those protesters in his tweet and in his video message, is it enough, or do you think that he's still in some way fanning the flames by contending that it's a stolen election?
Listen, people are responsible for their own behavior, first and foremost. You can't blame this on the president or anybody else. You're responsible for your own behavior, full stop. And the president told him to go home, and even he said, I love him. And people are trying to criticize him for saying he loved them, but I wake up every single morning and I say, love the people, love the call. And I love these guys too. Doesn't mean I condone what they did. I went and I talked to a whole bunch of law enforcement that they have a triage center set in the basement of one of our office buildings. And if I said there was 25 or 50 of them, I'd probably be underestimating. And I shook every one of their hands. I told them, thank you. Every one of these guys have families. Every one of these guys, or for the most of them, had families. Most of them were married with kids, and they were shaken up. They were shooken up quite a bit. One young man, unfortunately, is probably going to lose his eye, and because he got hit with some object. And I asked him, I said, what happened? And every one of them told me the same thing. He said, these separated from the protesters. These guys had evil in their eyes when they came after us. The rest of the protesters continued on their way. These guys broke away. They were there as agitators. And when they started breaking the glass out, I even confronted them at the door, and I said, guys, because I started yelling, don't shoot, don't shoot. And I hollered at the guys at the other side. I said, you almost got shot. You almost got shot. Are you serious? Are you willing to do this? And most of them calmed down a little bit. One of them, he was the agitator. He was the one that was probably the one that got most of them stirred up. Of course, he kept running his mouth, and he's just unreasonable. He's one of the guys you can't be unreasonable, or you can't reason with. But we're all, at the end of the day, we have the right to protest, but we don't have the right to destroy public or private property. We don't have the right to go this far. And you should feel strong and be willing to stand your ground for what you believe in. And I believe you have the right to do that. But this is not the America. I've seen this overseas. This is not what we do inside the United States, and this went too far.
Yeah, no question about it. The pictures tell the story. I mean, when you think about now, many of your colleagues have said and communicated that they want to see this process go forward. They want the Congress to perform its duty.
Agreed.
As mentioned, you were one who was going to object to the electors. Is there anything about what has transpired today that makes you reassess that? Not because of perhaps the substance, I mean, whatever your reasons were, those haven't changed, but just because of the tenor and the powder keg that has been unleashed. And, you know, people can lay blame where they want to lay blame. But is there anything about what has transpired that makes you think, you know what, it's time to get on with it? Our position has been known, but this country needs to get on with the peaceful transition.
You know, we're still having the conversation, and I still feel very strongly about our stance. I still believe that there's some real questions about the constitutional authority, about some changes that happened in some of the states. No question about that. And so there's still going to be some electoral votes that are contested too. We do have to get on with our work, but and the demeanor to which we present the findings may change. We're still discussing that. We're actually having open discussions among all of us, among both sides right now. But we will move forward with the process. And at the end of the day, this is to make sure that we do have fair and balanced elections, that we have elections moving forward. So anytime we have future elections, what separated us from other democracies is people had faith and they believed in their vote and their election, and they were fair. And that belief isn't there. But what happened today, what transpired today, is no excuse for that. There is no excuse for what happened today, zero. And as I said, there was a lot of peaceful protesters. A lot of them came in from Oklahoma that I knew, and they're all headed home. They weren't part of this. This was a separate group. These were agitators that came there to make as much destruction as possible.
You know, and it's one of those things, because there are, you can have, I mean, politics is all about passion and passion for what you believe. Sure. And I always say, you know, if you're not protesting, I mean, that's what America's all about. People fought and died for that right.
Right.
But when you...
That's the First Amendment. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely. But when you fan the flames, you know, sometimes you can unleash an element that isn't responsible, that are rioters and agitators. And I guess that's kind of where I'm asking you, you know, whether you feel that there has been rhetoric that's irresponsible, that
there's been rhetoric
irresponsible
on both sides. The rhetoric's been irresponsible on both sides. We've seen it from both sides. I mean, there's been some really big flames that were flamed, that was fanned before President Trump even got into office. Before he was even sworn into office, there was a lot of it going on. We've seen these protests going on, and it's been bubbling. It hasn't been from our side, and that's why I said I have a hard time believing these are actual true Trump supporters, because you haven't seen this from Trump supporters. Trump supporters have been out there too. They've been on the streets. They've been to rallies. They've had conflict with Antifa and the other groups, and it has never went to this point. This is the first time we've ever seen it go to this point. And as I said before, it doesn't make any difference who's fanning the flames. At the end of the day, we are all responsible for our own actions. And the way you choose because a lot of people's lives have changed. There's a lot of law enforcement, a lot of Capitol Police and D.C. Police and Sergeant of Arms that came to work today that's going to go home a little bit different. There's a young lady that died because she stormed through the door and an officer had to make a split decision and had to shoot her. And guess what? Their families' lives have changed. His life has got changed because the first time you discharge a weapon, it changes you. It changes you, and it changes you forever. Yeah. And unfortunately, there's some people out there that's lost a loved one too, a daughter, a mother. I don't know how old she was, but there's a family that's going to grieve tonight because of what got out of hand, and it should have never ever got to this point. This is a dark day for all of us, and I hope we can all take a deep breath and learn something from this. But we still need to be passionate. You have a right to be passionate about what you believe politically, but we can debate in a better manner than this.
We can. We're better than this. Congressman Mullen, we're glad you're safe. Thank you for your time this evening, sir. Be safe and keep us posted on the plans as Congress tries to get about the business of the American people. And let me turn to Kristen Welker. Kristen, I don't know if we've caught up since the president issued his last tweet. What was the thinking behind that? What are you hearing from the senior officials inside the White House tonight?
Well, Savannah, the tweet comes after a number of senior officials here have been pushing him to go further than that video statement that he released earlier today when he again reiterated the false claims of voter fraud, but did urge these protesters, the mob that gathered outside the Capitol, to be peaceful, not to engage in any violence. And so this tweet seems to be the opposite of what some of his top officials were urging him to do, which was to come out and make a statement point blank and say, stand down. This tweet does what he did at the rally, which is to reiterate those false claims, saying, remember this day forever. It is worth noting it has now been flagged by Twitter saying that it could incite more violence. So that is the backdrop against which we are seeing that tweet come out. So I would anticipate, Savannah, that you are going to continue behind the scenes here to have a number of his top aides try to push him to say more and, quite frankly, to do more. I can tell you that the world is watching. In fact, we're just seeing a tweet come out from Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, who says Canadians are deeply disturbed and saddened by the attack on democracy in the United States, our closest ally and neighbor. So people are watching what is happening as it unfolds here, Savannah, and frankly cannot believe what they are seeing unfold in the nation's capital here in the United States. Now, let me just take a step back and give you a sense of the thinking as this day began. I spoke with a number of top officials who said, look, they saw this as the president and his supporters' last stand, what was going to happen inside the halls of Congress, to air that debate and the dispute that they felt needed to be had about the electoral vote count. They wanted to try to convince President Trump that this was, in fact, his last stand, and the hope was that after today, he would be able to move forward. There wasn't a whole lot of optimism that he would essentially abandon his rhetoric, but that supporters would feel as though at least the debate had been had in the halls of Congress. But White House officials acknowledging privately, look, he has lost, and that ultimately he's going to have to acknowledge that. Savannah.
All right, and we just got a statement from Senator Romney that was posted, and let me just read a little part of it. He said, what happened at the U.S. Capitol today was an insurrection incited by the President of the United States. Those who choose to continue to support his dangerous gambit by objecting to the results of a legitimate democratic election will forever be seen as being complicit in an unprecedented attack against our democracy. The statement of Senator Mitt Romney earlier today, and you can just imagine behind closed doors those senators that are sheltering in place together, senators who disagree and have found themselves in this situation. You can imagine the conversations that might be going on there. And Casey Hunt, our Capitol Hill correspondent, the more pressing conversation is what's next? How can they continue this work that was supposed to take place January 6th, the certifying of the electoral vote? Can it continue tonight? Will it continue tonight?
The short answer, Savannah, is that members are determined that it will. The logistics of this are still being finalized because obviously we've never been in this situation before, but this has been the focus of the conversations. There's an expectation that they may be able to get back into the Senate chamber sooner rather than later. There's a push from Republican leadership, Mitch McConnell, to do that, to show that they will not be cowed by what happened today, by people invading the U.S. Capitol in what both Mitt Romney and the former President George W. Bush called an insurrection. That's a pretty specific choice of words from those two top Republicans, obviously not supporters of President Trump based on all of this. But there is that determination to make this happen. Now, it's possible it won't actually be on the Senate floor. We obviously are dealing with the security situation there, sweeping all of the nooks and crannies there, all of the people that were in here. It takes time, and obviously no one wants to go into an unsafe situation. So there have been some different discussions of how to make this happen, but I think certainly the people that I am texting with, talking to, are confident they're going to find some way to demonstrate to the American people that the business of the Congress is going to go on, even in spite of all of this. Savannah.
Casey Hunt, thank you so much. Our coverage continues as we look at Washington, D.C. tonight. On a night like no other, the United States Capitol is locked down. Protesters stormed the building today, stopping the business of Congress at a critical moment, the moment when under the Constitution they're to certify the electoral votes of the election and ensure the peaceful transfer of power. We are going to turn over our coverage. NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt just ahead. Stay with NBC as we continue to cover this breaking story throughout the night.
This is an NBC News special report.
And breaking
breaking news tonight, the deadly siege on Congress as an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol. We've seen shocking images of chaos, rioters rushing past barricades and police up the Capitol steps, forcing their way inside. Both the House and the Senate evacuated. Lawmakers moved to safe locations. The invaders roaming the abandoned Senate floor, one hanging from the balcony. Police with guns drawn inside the House. The violence erupting, one woman fatally shot outside the Capitol. Improvised explosive devices found. Several people injured. Offices vandalized. Windows smashed. The National Guard called in to quell the unrest, with that city now under curfew. The breach abruptly halting a joint session of Congress just as Republicans launched a last-ditch effort to overturn President-elect Biden's victory in the Electoral College. This unrest breaking out just after President Trump spoke at a rally near the White House, stoking the crowd by falsely claiming he won the election. Later, in a taped message, the president still baselessly saying the election was stolen, but telling rioters to go home. All of it coming just as Democrats win control of the Senate after the historic election in Georgia. A lot to talk about as we continue our rolling coverage. I want to welcome you back to NBC News coverage of the siege at the U.S. Capitol. Right now, police in Washington enforcing a curfew, driving rioters from the streets and Capitol grounds after securing the inside from those pro-Trump intruders who occupied the Capitol for several hours. Officials telling us a short time ago that one person shot inside the Capitol by law enforcement has died. All this taking place as the House and Senate met to formally count the certified electoral ballots that will make Joe Biden the next president. Our Casey Hunt is on Capitol Hill. Casey, bring us up to date.
Lester, just absolutely stunning images today here at the Capitol as protesters overran the Capitol and multiple law enforcement agencies had to be called in after a number of them not only breached the building, but breached the very floor of the House and of the Senate as they were conducting this business of trying to count the Electoral College votes, normally a very straightforward process that only takes about a half an hour, that would name Joe Biden as president-elect. This, of course, occurring after President Trump held a rally with tens of thousands of people outside of the White House. And the images inside the building were pretty unreal. There were protesters that were on the walls of the Capitol, as well as gunshots at one point. Watch. Tonight, stunning images as rioters supporting President Trump overrun the Capitol, scuffling with police. On the floor of the House, officers with guns drawn, with protesters just outside the door. Here you see rioters trying to break down a door, and you hear a gunshot. Over in the Senate, protesters breaching what's supposed to be the highly secure Senate floor, abruptly stopping the counting of electoral votes. Some taking photos on the Senate dais, others shouting and pushing past officers to get inside. Elsewhere, this man sitting with his feet up behind a desk in Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office. Police placing the Capitol on lockdown.
A riot was declared. It was clear that the crowd was intent on causing harm to our officers by deploying chemical irritants on police.
Members of Congress rushing to take shelter, some wearing gas masks.
We were just told that there has been tear gas in the rotunda, and we're being instructed to each of us get gas masks that are under our seats.
It began just after that massive pro-Trump rally. Tens of thousands gathering near the White House to protest the expected declaration of Joe Biden's Electoral College victory.
There is the American flag, and beneath it, these crowds of people now who have stormed, trying to make their wishes known.
The group then marching to the Capitol, many just standing on the steps outside, others wandering in the rotunda, some scaling down the building. At one point, an armed standoff. Police say one person was shot. Democratic Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger describing to us how she got out of the building.
There were people banging on the doors of the floor of the House of Representatives. It took multiple efforts for us to be able to make our way safely and then depart the Capitol. Capitol. And it's deeply, deeply disturbing what we saw at the U.S. Capitol today.
Top House Republican Kevin McCarthy condemning what he was seeing.
This is so un-American. I condemn any of this violence. This is not the American way. This is not protected by the First Amendment. This must stop now.
Multiple Democratic and Republican lawmakers urged President Trump to appear on camera to tell the protesters to leave. Instead, he later tweeted, "I'm asking for everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful, no violence. Remember, we are the party of law and order. Respect the law and our great men and women in blue." The president-elect then imploring President Trump to speak.
At their best, the words of a president can inspire. At their worst, they can incite. And therefore, I call on President Trump to go on national television now to fulfill his oath and defend the Constitution and demand an end to this siege.
By about 4:15 this afternoon, this message from the White House.
This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you.
And Casey, that statement not going far enough for many on Capitol Hill tonight.
That's right, Lester. Many Republicans urging the president to go farther in trying to ensure calm, to calm this situation down and to make it easier to have a peaceful transfer of power to Joe Biden. Lester.
All right, Casey Hunt, thank you. And one of those caught in today's assault was Congressman Mike Gallagher, a Wisconsin Republican. He joins us tonight on the phone. First of all, Congressman, are you someplace safe and well?
I am. Yeah, we're kind of sheltering in place here, but I honestly never thought I'd be barricading the doors and watching what I saw happen today in the U.S. Capitol.
Yeah, I mean, some of the images are stunning, and you saw them firsthand. Can you walk us through what happened? I know the Senate and House had split apart for the purposes of debating some objections. When did you realize something was amiss?
Well, it was almost simultaneous with the debate over the certification of Arizona's electors when the protesters started to gather at the foot of the Capitol, and things quickly descended into violence. You know, you heard multiple flashbangs being deployed, which was presumably the Capitol Police trying to get the protesters to back off. The protesters were violently clashing with the police. Earlier in the day, one of the buildings have been evacuated when protesters breached the perimeter, and then somehow they breached the security perimeter of the Capitol itself, and they started breaking down windows, running amok in Statuary Hall, eventually got onto the Senate floor and the House floor, and then, you know, the vice president was evacuated by Secret Service, and then someone was shot, and it's my understanding that that person has died. I mean, that is the cost of what has happened today. I mean, someone died in the United States Capitol, in America today. I mean, this is unacceptable. And I think, if nothing else, the objectors need to stop playing this dangerous game. We need to reconvene tonight when order is restored. The objectors need to stand down. We need to certify the results of the election. And Donald Trump is ultimately going to have to concede. That's the only way we avoid stuff like this in the future. As a Republican, it bums me out that we lost the presidential election, but such is life. When you lose, you take a second, you look in the mirror, and you figure out how you can do better next time, and that's what we need to do as a party right now.
So, Congressman, it appears they have secured the Capitol now, but that doesn't change the belief in the people we're seeing here that this election was somehow stolen, and the president probably didn't help things today by his remarks. So where does that leave us tomorrow and the next day?
Well, I think the prudent move, once we all say it together that the election's over and we support the peaceful transition of power, is to not dismiss the concerns of election fraud that we've seen in multiple states. I think many states, including my home state of Wisconsin, need their state legislatures to do a version of what Florida did after the 2000 election. There were certainly changes that were made at the last second in the midst of the pandemic, and we've had a massive increase in absentee balloting. And I think it's fair for the legislatures to take a step back and say, here's what worked, here's what didn't work, and here's how we can give our citizens confidence in the integrity of the election. But that's a separate question than the question of whether Congress should or even has the authority to overturn the results of the state election. I mean, I don't see a reading of that anywhere in the Constitution. That is a recipe for chaos. It's certainly not a conservative reading of the Constitution. It's a highly progressive one. And I just don't believe the federal government should have that power. That power belongs to the states and to the people.
Congressman Mike Gallagher, we're glad you're well. Thank you for spending a few minutes with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
As you heard, all this happened as Congress was in the middle of certifying, not actually certifying, the votes had been certified, but they were counting the Electoral College vote for President-elect Joe Biden and debating objections to that vote. Let's get more on that from NBC's Kristen Welker.
Those stunning images of a mob storming the Capitol followed another extraordinary moment.
Madam Speaker, members of Congress.
Vice President Mike Pence presiding over the special session of Congress in which the electoral votes are counted and the winner of the presidential election declared. And for the first time, Pence publicly breaking with the president.
Are you going to overturn the election results today?
Refusing the president's demands that he unlawfully overturn electoral votes for Biden. Pence releasing a letter saying, "My oath to support and defend the Constitution constrains me from claiming unilateral authority to determine which electoral votes should be counted and which should not." That letter released just minutes after President Trump called out Pence multiple times.
Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us.
At a massive rally across from the White House.
So I hope Mike has the courage to do what he has to do. And I hope he doesn't listen to the rhinos and the stupid people that he's listening to.
Later tweeting Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done. Today, again, pushing false claims of widespread fraud.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
And today, for the first time, the top Senate Republican Mitch McConnell blasting the president and those rejecting Joe Biden's electoral college win.
If this election were overturned by mere allegations from the losing side, our democracy would enter a death spiral.
Still, at least 13 Republican senators and dozens of House Republicans were poised to raise objections to the results in at least 6 states, unless a commission is created to audit the election.
What does it say to the nearly half the country that believes this election was rigged if we vote not even to consider the claims of illegality and fraud in this election?
But shortly after the debate began, those protesters started storming in. And shortly after that moment, all the debate ended. They were going alphabetically through the states, and they've never made it past Arizona. Lester.
Kristen, we're hearing that some in the White House are now asking the president to make a more forceful statement. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that's absolutely right, Lester. I can tell you that some top White House staff are urging the president to respond strongly to what transpired today. Now, officials don't know if he's actually going to say anything else or issue a more forceful statement. And some Trump allies outside the White House are frustrated with his reluctance to do so. They had wanted him to go further in his remarks and to say something live, not what he released on tape. But the president is hesitant to aggressively push back against his own supporters.
All right.
Lester.
Kristen Welker at the White House. Thank you. President-elect Joe Biden forcefully condemned today's assault. He called on President Trump to step up and demand an end to the siege. Our Jeff Bennett joins us now. Jeff, what else did Mr. Biden have to say?
Hey, Lester, the president-elect condemned the actions of the rioters as an insurrection, saying their behavior bordered on sedition. He also called out President Trump for inciting the violence, and Biden also talked about the challenges ahead. Take a look.
The work of the moment and the work of the next 4 years must be the restoration of democracy, of decency, honor, respect, the rule of law, just plain, simple decency.
Now, in recent weeks, we've seen Joe Biden increasingly step into this apparent leadership void, delivering addresses to the nation about the pandemic, about the tough economy, and now this crisis in our democracy. And asked by reporters, Biden said he wasn't concerned about his own safety, his own security, or even his own inauguration, which is set to happen at the U.S. Capitol outside in 2 weeks' time. Lester.
Yeah, a lot of conversation about that in light of what has happened here. All right, Jeff, thank you. And we noted that curfew now underway in Washington. Police have been working to disperse the rioters from the Capitol and the area. Gabe Gutierrez is on the ground for us there. Gabe, what's the latest? Are people beginning to move along and disperse?
Lester, it's an extremely eerie scene out here, out in front of the Capitol. Earlier, there was all this chaos. Now it is extremely quiet. As we were coming here a short time ago, driving through this area and walking through this area, we heard loudspeakers blaring that a curfew was in effect. A great deal of National Guard members were also here, and they were also on very high alert. Lester, it's incredible to see the Capitol just like this as night falls. The question will be, will there be more protesters that stick around? But at this point, I can tell you, as you can see from the street behind me, people have emptied out. There doesn't appear to be a lot of protesters here remaining. But it was incredible to witness this earlier today. Lester, I've covered an incredible amount of protests over the last few months, past few years, and to see these protesters breach the Capitol. I spoke by phone, and as I was making my way here, to a Republican congressman who was negotiating with some of these rioters inside the Capitol as they were trying to make their way in. He said it was just an incredible sight, un-American, and so many people around the country right now are asking, how could this happen? How could these rioters be allowed to breach the walls of the United States Capitol? But again, right now, a curfew is in effect and the streets are quiet. Lester?
All right, Gabe, thank you very much. Let's turn to Republican Congressman Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma. He's on the phone as well. Congressman, thank you for being well. I assume that you're someplace now safe?
Yes, sir. We're all in good standings.
As we noted, the Senate and House had split apart to begin dealing with some of these objections. You yourself have objected to some of the state certifications. Will that process now end as the approval of the vote resumes?
You know, I think you probably hear a different tone from both sides. We should be. I mean, while everybody is responsible for their own actions, we can also learn to debate better than this. And at the end of the day, we still have a constitutional authority with the electoral vote for January 6th. And so as soon as the perimeter is secure, I believe we'll be going back to work.
Will you drop your objections?
No, the objection is still there. To contest the electoral vote is still my constitutional authority and my obligation. And so to contest it is something I feel very strongly about. It's not political. It's something I feel like is my constitutional authority to do so. And so we will do that, but we can do it in a more civilized manner. And I think that goes for all of us. Listen, a lot of the rhetoric that's been given from both sides over the last 5 years as why everybody is responsible for their own actions. This bubbled to this point, and this should have never happened. This is a dark day, and this kind of action is not acceptable from anybody. I don't care what your reason is. This is never acceptable.
Do you think your actions, those of others who have challenged these electoral votes, in some way help fuel what played out today?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I don't mean to be disrespectful. That's almost ridiculous because we've heard both sides have real bad rhetoric for 5 years. We've seen protests going on for 5 years. And to be quite honest, we've never seen this from Trump supporters before. They've been out there. They've confronted. They've had interactions with Antifa and other groups before. We've had Trump rallies. We've seen them have rallies before, and we've never seen violence. We've never seen this before, not from Trump supporters. And so I wouldn't even call this really protesters. There was agonizers that went into the protesters. I had the opportunity to go and visit with a lot of our men and women that stood guard, that were putting their life on the line to make sure that members and staff gets to go home safe at some point. And they have families too. And I went down to the triage center, and there may have been 25 or 50 of them, I don't know, but they were bloody and bruised, and one young man I'm sure is going to lose his eye. And they were shaken up. And I asked them what happened, and they said there was a group that broke away from the protesters, and they had evil in their eyes. These weren't just your normal protesters; they had evil in their eyes, and there wasn't just one or two or three of them that said that to me. There was multiple ones that I talked to, but at the end of the day, we are all responsible for our own actions, regardless. We're responsible for our behavior, and I think President Trump did a good job by telling them to go home, and then he even told them that he loved them, and a lot of people want to make a big deal about that. But listen, every morning I wake up and I say, "Love the people, love the call." I love these people too, but what they did today was inexcusable, and unfortunately, even a young lady lost her life because of it. And there's two lives that changed there. The officer that discharged his weapon. I don't care who you are. The first time you discharge your weapon, it takes a part of you, and there's going to be, and so his life has been changed. And there's some people that love that young lady. I don't know her her age, but I know she had to have family, and there's a family that's broken today because our behavior got out of line, and we are better than that. We don't do that.
Congressman Mullen, we're glad you're safe. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
The world is watching as these chaotic scenes play out. A number of world leaders calling on President Trump to condemn the violence. Richard Engel is in London with a global reaction. Richard, it was fascinating to hear some of the things coming from overseas, the kind of things that have come from this country and other times.
Well, by now, Lester, there have been dozens of reactions from world leaders, and they have been condemning what has happened. There have been expressions of shock, expressions of horror, and they are all saying that this was an attack on democracy. Here in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson tweeted out that it is now vital that there should be a peaceful and orderly transfer of power. Germany's foreign minister said, "The enemies of democracy will be pleased at these unbearable images." The leader of the Secretary General of NATO, the world's most powerful military alliance, said that shocking scenes in Washington, the outcome of this democratic election, must be respected. And around the world, leaders were placing blame directly on President Trump. The Prime Minister of Sweden tweeted out that, one more, President Trump and many members of Congress have a great responsibility for what is happening now. A spokesman for the President of South Africa simply tweeted, "Pray for America."
All right, Richard, thank you. I want to turn now to our Frank Thorpe, who's also at the Capitol. He tweeted some stunning video of intruders roaming free on the Senate floor today. Frank, tell us some of the things you've seen and observed.
Yeah, Lester, I mean, I just have to say, I cannot stress enough what a stunning and surprising and shocking scene it was to walk into the gallery above the Senate floor and see the dozen or so rioters who had made it onto the Senate floor. The Senate floor is one of the most historic places that it handles the legislative work for senators, and it is incredibly locked down. Not only is the Capitol locked down, there are multiple levels of security to get into the Capitol every day, but the Senate chamber, the Senate floor, is one of the most sacred rooms in the Capitol, and to see these rioters on the floor was a stunning situation. I have to say, Lester, one of the things that I had been told by aides in the last couple of weeks is that they were worried by the calls by President Trump to have people come to the Capitol and to gather outside the Capitol. They were worried that something like this could happen, and it did. And it's just this, I cannot express the unprecedented nature of the rioters coming into the Capitol, not having gone through security, and storming the floor like they did.
Yeah, you and I were on the air live when those images first came in of that scene from the Senate, and I think both of us were left speechless for a moment. Quite extraordinary. Frank Thorpe, thank you for your reporting. I want to bring in our political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd. Boy, Chuck, what does this say about a division in America? This thing may be, being put to rest tonight, but the feelings are still very strong, and they are out there.
A couple weeks ago on Meet the Press, Lester, I started off and I just simply asked the question, is this the 1850s or the 1950s, talking about the divides in America? And frankly, I was referring to sort of, in the 1950s, we had the Red Scare, you had Joseph McCarthy, but we shut that down, right? We somehow came together and we shut that down as a country. In the 1850s, obviously, the divide in this country culminated in a civil war. And so you now look at an event like today, and making a comparison to the 1850s is suddenly, no longer hyperbole, which some of us, I think, were accused of over the last few years. The sad thing about all this, Lester, is that, well, we're all shocked by what we witnessed today. Are we that surprised? We've all been concerned this moment was coming, that we had a president of the United States that was fomenting this, that he had a propaganda machine, frankly, behind him that helped him push this. So I do think this is gut check time. We still have elected leaders in this country, I think, who would like to keep this republic standing. President Trump's actions cannot go unanswered. You've heard various people talk impeachment. You've heard some people bring up the 25th Amendment. I don't think these are ideas that are just being tossed around. These should be serious conversations. There's a lot of senators right now locked up with Vice President Pence right now. Because you got to ask yourself, is the president mentally fit at this point and has the temperament to handle the presidency even for the next 13 days? What he did today and his actions as they continue all night tonight have to call those things into question. So these conversations, I think, are taking place and they're real.
And some of those things you mentioned, obviously very emotional, and many people would have called them alarmists weeks ago, perhaps not tonight. Presidential historian Michael Beschloss is with us as well. Michael, there's 2 more weeks left in this presidency. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but where is this going?
It's going in ways that are very ominous, Lester. You know, this is a day I hoped I would never live to see. We saw a terrorist attack on the United States Congress and the United States Capitol, and it was instigated by the President of the United States, who today at midday told this big mob, march up Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol and take back our country, and stop the counting of the ballots that will lead to an election that he charged was stolen. And once they were with guns and other weapons and committing violence in the Capitol, he made a video in the Rose Garden saying, "We love you and you're very special." We have never seen anything like that in more than 2 centuries of American history. I hope we never do again, but it has to stop. He's in office for 2 more weeks. We can't live with the possibility that this kind of thing will spread and get worse.
You know, we've all seen things today that may make us shudder. Michael, thank you. The question many asking tonight, how did this assault on the Capitol happen? Why wasn't it more secure when Trump supporters have been threatening similar actions for months? Let's go to Tom Costello with that.
For weeks, right-wing online chatter had discussed just this scenario. The president had called for protesters to march on Capitol Hill. Washington's mayor had called out the National Guard to protect the city streets. Every D.C. police officer was on the job.
Today's events were not representation of peaceful protests. Today, what we witnessed was unlawful, riotous behavior.
The question tonight, why weren't Capitol Police prepared for this?
We need to ask questions about why it was or was not designated a national special event and why the security around it was insufficient.
2,300 officers make up the Capitol Police Force. Today, they appeared to be on the defensive, retreating as the crowd pushed forward, forced to pull their guns in the House chambers. But none of the kind of aggressive tactics police used against mostly peaceful protesters last June in front of the White House after the killing of George Floyd.
I would have never anticipated that we would lose control of both the Capitol and the floors. So maybe the first inkling that was different is how hateful and spiteful and violent this crowd was.
Tonight, Capitol Police and D.C. Police are getting help from neighboring communities, neighboring police departments in Maryland and Virginia, as well as the National Guard in Virginia, D.C., and Maryland. Tonight, it is all hands on deck here in the D.C. area. Lester?
All right, Tom Costello, thanks. NBC's Andrea Mitchell has covered Congress and the White House for many years. I think we all agree we've not seen anything quite like the way this day has played out, Andrea. But I want to raise the question with you that I did with Michael a moment ago, Beschloss, about what the next 2 weeks could bring.
Well, it is so hard to predict. I think there will be censure, some action taken, certainly by the House members. You're seeing tonight one Republican from Washington State, Kathy McMorris Rogers, saying that she will no longer object. She was one of the objectors. I know you talked to the other congressmen who will still object, but they have to rethink how much responsibility they had for what happened today.
And Andrea, what does this mean? Will this be an easier or harder Biden presidency because of this, at least in the beginning?
I think the poison in the atmosphere makes it so much more difficult coming in. He has so much healing to do, but there is a real a signal, at least from Mitch McConnell, that things might be different. There may be some way to come together in the middle.
All right. Andrea, thank you. So here we are at the end of an extraordinary and chaotic day in the history of our country. We've seen an assault on our democracy like we've never seen. The normally routine exercise of certifying, or in this case, counting the votes of a presidential election turning into a life-threatening attack on one of the pillars of our country. Gunfire, a woman dies, others wounded, members of Congress in gas masks, hiding under their desks, saying prayers. The U.S. Capitol occupied and under siege. The questions will linger for a long time. On a very basic level, just how could an angry mob breach what should have been one of the most secure buildings in the world? Why did it take so long for authorities, including President Trump himself, to respond? And what responsibility will the president ultimately bear for what happened today? Tonight, members of Congress are vowing to get back to the process of certifying the election of Joe Biden as the next president of the United States. Despite what we've been through today, our democracy is strong, and there will be a transfer of power exactly 2 weeks from today, right there at the U.S. Capitol. I want to go now to Casey Hunt, who can give us a little more color as we now a good hour past the curfew, what's happening at the Capitol itself. Casey?
Lester, good evening to you. And as we turn into the evening here at the Capitol, the attitude here is one of resolve. It has been an incredibly difficult day at the U.S. Capitol. I've covered the Capitol for over